Police Department. We received a complaint about noise coming from this residence. Sir or ma'am, if anyone is inside, make yourself known. For safety reasons, the door is open. I'm going to enter to check on everyone's welfare. Entering the residence now.
Police Department, if anyone's inside, please come out where I can see you. I'm here because we received a noise complaint. I just need to check that everyone's okay. Hey, stop! Get back! Do not move. Do not resist.
I'm not a woman. I'm a skinwalker.
The call came in just after 10:40 p.m. on a damp Thursday night in Riverton, Ohio. Dispatch logged it as a routine noise complaint. Neighbors on Cedar Lane reported persistent banging, shouting, and possible distress sounds coming from the blue two-story house at the end of the block. No prior history, no known weapons, no domestic flags. Officer Daniel Mercer, 12 years on patrol, acknowledged the call and rolled alone. Cedar Lane was quiet when he arrived, porch lights off, windows dark. The only thing that broke the stillness was the front door of the house in question, wide open, swaying slightly as if someone had passed through it and never bothered to close it. Mercer parked at the curb and activated his body camera. From the sidewalk, he announced himself. Clear voice, standard procedure. Police Department, anyone inside, make yourself known. No response. He stepped onto the porch. The smell hit first, stale air, something sour underneath it. Not rot exactly, more like a house that had been shut too long and then disturbed. Again, he called out, louder this time, a warning that if no one answered, he would enter to check on everyone's safety. Still nothing. The doorframe was scarred near the handle, old damage, not fresh. Inside, the living room was dim but not abandoned, furniture in place, family photos on the wall, a child's shoes near the stairs. A television paused on a local news channel, the ticker frozen mid-sentence. Mercer crossed the threshold. He moved slowly, narrating his actions for the camera. The floor creaked under his boots. Somewhere deeper in the house, a rhythmic sound echoed, soft, irregular, not footsteps, not breathing, something else. He cleared the living room, then the dining area. No people, no immediate signs of a struggle, but the house felt wrong. Too still for the kind of noise the neighbors described. As he approached the hallway, the temperature seemed to drop. The light grew flatter, almost gray. At the end of the hall, a bedroom door stood half open. Mercer announced himself again. That was when she came out. The woman moved fast, faster than he expected. She burst from the doorway and closed the distance in a second, arms raised, fingers curled like claws. Her skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent. Thick black circles ringed her eyes, giving the impression of someone who hadn't slept in weeks or years. Her mouth opened, but no scream came out. Mercer drew his taser but didn't fire. He sidestepped, used his weight, and drove her into the wall. The impact knocked the air out of her. She didn't fight back the way people usually do. No shouting, no pleas. Just a low sound, almost a whimper, as he cuffed her hands behind her back. Up close, her eyes were wide and unfocused. She stared past him, not at him. He asked her name. She didn't answer. He asked if anyone else was in the house. Silence. As he lifted her to her feet, she finally spoke. Her voice was flat, calm, completely detached. "I'm not a woman," she said. "I'm a skinwalker." Mercer paused. He'd heard a lot on night shifts. This was new. He escorted her toward the living room, maintaining distance, watching her hands, her posture, every micro-movement. She didn't resist, didn't look afraid, didn't look angry. Before he reached the front door, a question formed in his mind, one that didn't belong in a routine noise complaint. If the neighbors heard shouting and if no one else was in the house, who had she been talking to? By 11:06 p.m., 2 more units were on Cedar Lane, lights kept low to avoid drawing a crowd. The situation on paper was already being boxed into something simple. Noise complaint, right arrow, open door, right arrow, welfare check, right arrow, combative subject detained. Officer Daniel Mercer stood on the porch while paramedics assessed the woman on the living room floor. She sat with her back against the couch, wrists cuffed in front now, staring at a spot just above the TV like she was watching something no one else could see. Her name, they learned, was Alina Ward, 32, no outstanding warrants. Local address matched the house. No weapons on her, no alcohol smell, no obvious drugs. The EMT tried basic questions, date, location, if she knew why police were there. Alina blinked slowly and offered only one sentence, repeated twice, as if it was the only line she had left. "I'm a skinwalker." Mercer gave his initial statement to Sergeant Lena Carver in the driveway, voice controlled but tight. He described the open door, lack of response, and the sudden rush from the hallway bedroom. He emphasized the key piece that would end up in every report. She advanced aggressively. He feared for his safety. He used controlled force to detain. Carver nodded, watching the Bodycam playback on a cruiser laptop. The video backed Mercer up in the broad strokes, door open, repeated announcements, entry, movement down the hallway, then the fast lunge. The audio caught Mercer's warning and the woman's low sound as he pinned her. No profanity, no dramatic struggle, just a weird, hollow quiet. "Charges?" Carver asked. Mercer hesitated, then went with the cleanest option. "Attempted assault on an officer. Maybe disorderly. But she's not right." They chose resisting/obstructing as the immediate hold and transported her for a mental health evaluation under an emergency admission. It kept things procedural, safe, contained. Inside the house, a quick protective sweep confirmed what Mercer had already felt. No second person, no injured victim, no broken furniture, no blood, no overturned chairs. Nothing that matched the neighbors' description of shouting and banging. And yet the neighbors had called, multiple times. Carver sent one officer to canvass the houses closest to Alina's. The statements came back consistent in tone and inconsistent in detail, an early red flag in any case file. One neighbor claimed the noise sounded like a man yelling. Another insisted it was a woman crying. A third described thuds like something heavy being dragged. All of them agreed on 2 points. It had been going on for at least an hour, and it was coming from inside the ward house. Carver made a note to request any available home security footage from the street-facing houses. If someone had come or gone, a camera would catch it. If no one had come or gone, the man yelling claim would look like the neighborhood filling in blanks with fear. Back at the station, the preliminary narrative was clean enough to close quickly. A resident in mental distress caused a disturbance, left her door open, and rushed an officer during a welfare check. She was detained without serious injury and transferred for psychiatric evaluation. End of story. That's how these calls often ended. The city preferred it that way, no prolonged incident, no headline, no lawsuit. But the details wouldn't sit flat. When Mercer replayed his own footage later, he noticed something the first pass didn't emphasize. Seconds before Alina lunged, the hallway audio picked up a sound, faint but distinct, like a second voice far back in the house. Not clear enough to quote, not loud enough to identify, but present. Mercer had heard it in real time too. He dismissed it as the TV or the house settling. Now it sounded like speech. Carver wasn't ready to call it that. She'd seen officers talk themselves into ghosts before: stress, adrenaline, pattern seeking. Still, she added it to the follow-up list: enhance audio, request dispatch logs, and verify the neighbor's timeline. Then another inconsistency landed, small but sharp. The dispatch record showed the first neighbor call about the ward house came in at 9:58 p.m., nearly 45 minutes earlier than the time most neighbors insisted the noise started. And there was a second call at 10:12 p.m. where the caller explicitly said, "Doors open, I think someone's inside." That meant Alina's front door hadn't just been left open when Mercer arrived. It had likely been open for almost an hour. Carver looked at Mercer across the briefing room table. "If your door is open for an hour," she said, "and you're screaming inside, why doesn't anyone come out? And why doesn't anyone go in?" Mercer didn't answer. He just stared at the still frame on the laptop, the dark hallway, the half-open bedroom door, the moment right before Alina appeared. Because if the door had been open that long, someone else could have been in that house before he got there. By morning, the case should have been dead. Alina Ward was on a 72-hour psychiatric hold at Riverton Regional Medical Center, sedated lightly, evaluated by an on-call psychiatrist who flagged acute psychosis with dissociative features. Officer Mercer had completed his use of force supplement. Sergeant Carver had signed off on the initial report. On paper, it was already drifting toward administrative closure, but the follow-ups didn't line up. The first problem came from audio. Department IT ran enhancement on Mercer's Bodycam at Carver's request. Nothing aggressive, just standard cleanup, noise reduction, level balancing. They weren't looking for anything supernatural or dramatic. Just confirmation that the sound Mercer remembered was a television artifact or HVAC noise. It wasn't. Roughly 11 seconds before Alina charged, the audio track picked up a second cadence beneath Mercer's voice. Low volume, male register. Too structured to be random noise. Not loud enough to make out words, but rhythmic in a way speech usually is: pauses, inflection, intent. The technician marked it as indistinct human vocalization, source unknown. That alone didn't prove anything. Houses carry sound, radios bleed through walls. But when Carver overlaid the dispatch timestamps, another issue surfaced. At 10:12 p.m., when the second neighbor called in about the open door, dispatch audio recorded something in the background of the call. Not yelling, not crying, a child's voice, short, clear, laughing. The dispatcher hadn't reacted in real time. It was faint, easy to miss, and the caller talked over it. But once isolated, it was unmistakable. That should not have been possible. Alina Ward had no children listed at her address. No custody records, no babysitting permits, no school enrollment tied to the home, and according to neighbors, she lived alone. Carver requested a full interior evidence walkthrough, not a crime scene, just documentation, photos. Room inventory, anything missed during the protective sweep. That's when the house started to tell a different story. Upstairs, the rear bedroom wasn't just occupied, it was preserved, dustless surfaces. A small bed made with precision. Stuffed animals arranged deliberately along the wall. A nightlight still plugged in, casting a dull amber glow even in daylight. On the dresser, a framed photo of a toddler boy, maybe 3 years old, smiling at the camera. Below it sat an urn. No label, no plaque, just a simple ceramic container. In the closet, officers found children's clothes, clean, folded, sorted by size. Shoes that had clearly been worn, not donations, not storage, recent use. Downstairs, behind the living room couch, they found the source of the banging neighbors described. The back panel of the wall had been removed, exposing studs and insulation. The drywall edges were splintered uneven, as if someone had been pulling at it repeatedly. Inside the cavity, scratch marks, fingernail depth. Human, Mercer stood there longer than he should have. Why would someone do this? He asked, not really to anyone. The working theory shifted quietly, not officially, not in the system yet. Grief, trauma severe enough to fracture routine reality. A woman alone in a house built around a child who was no longer alive. Sounds explained not by an intruder, but by repetition, voices replayed, movements reenacted, conversations staged for someone who wasn't there. Still, one piece didn't fit. If Alina was reliving something, why did multiple neighbors describe a man's voice? That answer came from Alina herself. During her first lucid window at the hospital, a social worker asked her an open-ended question, no pressure, no confrontation. "Who were you talking to last night?" Alina stared at the floor for a long time before answering. "My son," she said. Then, after a pause that stretched too long to ignore, she added, "And his father." Records showed no father living at the address. No recent visitation, no restraining orders, no known partner. When pressed gently, Alina didn't become agitated, she didn't escalate, she simply stated it as fact. "He died in the house," she said. "They both did, just not at the same time." That was the moment the case pivoted, because now the question wasn't whether Alina Ward was mentally ill. It was what had actually happened in that house before she broke, and why no one, including the system, had intervened sooner. Once the word child entered the file, the tone around the case changed. What had been a routine mental health hold was quietly reclassified as a historical fatality review. Not a homicide investigation, at least not yet, but enough to trigger record pulls, agency crosschecks, and the kind of attention departments prefer to avoid unless absolutely necessary. Sergeant Carver didn't announce it. She didn't need to. You could feel it in the way people stopped calling it the noise complaint and started calling it the Ward House. The first hard resistance came from paperwork. According to county records, a child named Caleb Ward, age 3, had died 18 months earlier from what was ruled an accidental drowning. Bathtub incident. No charges. No CPS findings at the time. Case closed in under 6 weeks. Clean, too clean. Carver requested the original incident report and the medical examiner's file. The response came back delayed, then partial, missing attachments. Scanned photos flagged as unavailable due to storage migration. That was the first institutional wall. Meanwhile, the hospital wasn't cooperating either, not overtly, but through friction. Alina's attending psychiatrist documented fixed delusional identity claims and recommended transfer to a long-term facility as soon as the mandatory hold expired. From a liability standpoint, the hospital wanted her out of the public eye and off the short-term unit. Mercer visited once off the clock. Alina recognized him immediately, not with fear, with relief. "You came back," she said. He asked her about the wall, about the voices, about the man the neighbors thought they heard. She answered slowly, carefully, as if precision mattered. "I talk out loud so he doesn't forget me," she said. "Caleb listens. His dad doesn't anymore." When Mercer asked where the father was now, Alina finally showed emotion. Her jaw tightened. "He left before the water stopped moving," she said. That phrase made it into Mercer's supplemental memo verbatim. Carver escalated. She pulled 911 logs from the month leading up to Caleb's death. There were 3 calls from the ward address that never turned into reports. Hang-ups, open lines, background noise, no follow-up units dispatched due to call volume. One of them included the same faint male voice pattern it had flagged in Mercer's Bodycam. Then came the pressure. A lieutenant from headquarters advised Carver, off record, to stay in lane. The city didn't need another retroactive tragedy. The death had been ruled accidental. The mother was unstable. Reopening it would only create exposure with no upside. Carver didn't argue, she just documented. The final push came from the neighbors. Once word spread that police were digging, statements changed. A man 2 houses down admitted he'd seen Alina's partner around the time of the child's death, drunk, loud, angry. Another neighbor recalled shouting matches that sounded physical but never reported because it always stopped. Patterns emerged. Missed chances. Small decisions that made sense in isolation and failed collectively. Alina wasn't transferred immediately. The hospital delayed, citing bed availability. In reality, Carver had asked them to hold, because if Alina Ward was moved before the paper trail was complete, the case would collapse back into silence. And somewhere between the missing files, the altered neighbor memories, and the institutional discomfort, one thing became unavoidable. This wasn't just about a woman who lost her mind. It was about how many systems had looked at the same warning signs and chosen not to see them. The missing file wasn't missing by accident. It surfaced through an indirect channel, an internal audit request tied to an unrelated records digitization project. Buried in a batch of legacy PDFs was the original emergency room intake note from the night Caleb Ward died. It hadn't been altered, it hadn't been erased, it had been ignored. The note described a 3-year-old male brought in unresponsive, pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Cause of death officially listed as drowning, but the attending nurse had added a free-text observation that never made it into the final summary. Multiple older bruises observed on upper arms and rib area, inconsistent with reported mechanism, flagged for physician review. The physician review never happened. The attending doctor that night had been a contractor working a double shift. His addendum was templated. No photos attached, no escalation, and the father Mark Henson had left the hospital before law enforcement arrived. That name mattered. Carver ran it again, this time wider. Mark Henson wasn't invisible. He was just transient. Prior arrests in 2 counties over DUIs, disorderly conduct, 1 domestic disturbance that ended without charges after the complainant declined to cooperate. The complainant had been Alina. There it was. The man's voice neighbors heard wasn't imagined. It was remembered. During the weeks after Caleb's death, Alina had repeatedly reported hearing Mark in the house. At first, responding officers documented it as grief-induced hallucination. Later calls were downgraded or cleared without response. But one officer newer to the job had written something different. Subject speaks to empty space as if responding to another adult. Tone indicates argument. Possible trauma fixation. That officer transferred departments 6 months later. His note went nowhere. The reveal wasn't that Mark had killed the child. There was no evidence to support that cleanly. The reveal was worse and more realistic. Mark had been present, drunk, angry. He had left the bath running, left the room, left Alina alone with panic in seconds that couldn't be recovered. And then he left entirely. No charges stuck because no one pushed. No one wanted to assign blame in a dead child case without certainty. The system defaulted to accident, and Alina defaulted to survival mode, preserving the house exactly as it was, replaying voices to keep memory intact. The banging neighbors heard, Alina tearing into the walls, convinced she could reach a moment before the water stopped moving. The man's voice, her recreating arguments out loud, assigning words to someone who never came back to answer. The night Mercer arrived wasn't a break from reality. It was the moment her internal loop finally spilled outward. When Carver laid it all out in a closed-door briefing, no one spoke for a long time. There was no villain to arrest. No clean headline, just a chain of non-decisions. The department's legal counsel advised caution. The city manager asked how likely it was this would become public. Carver asked a different question. What happens if we pretend we didn't learn this? No one answered that either, because the truth was now documented, and once documented, it demanded a collision. Once the file was complete, time became the enemy. Alina Ward's mandatory psychiatric hold was set to expire in 48 hours. The hospital had already lined up a transfer to a long-term facility 2 counties away. Once that happened, access would narrow, jurisdiction would blur, and whatever momentum the case had would dissipate into paperwork. Sergeant Carver requested an interagency review, not a press conference, not a reopening announcement. Just a formal table where police, CPS, the medical examiner's office, and city legal could sit in the same room and look at the same facts. That request triggered alarms. Legal counsel pushed back first. No criminal charges were pending. The child's death had been ruled accidental. Reframing it, even internally, invited scrutiny, civil exposure, and questions no one could answer cleanly. CPS resisted more quietly. Their file showed a home visit months before Caleb's death. No findings, no follow-up required. To reopen meant acknowledging a miss. The medical examiner's office sent a deputy director instead of the original examiner. The message was clear. We are not revisiting cause of death. 2 versions of reality now existed side by side. Version 1, the official one, said Alina Ward was a mentally ill woman who deteriorated after an unavoidable tragedy. Version 2, the documented one, said a system encountered warning signs repeatedly and treated each one as insufficient on its own. The collision came when Alina spoke again. During a final evaluation, she asked a question that forced the hospital's hand. "Why did you let him leave?" she asked. The psychiatrist assumed she meant Mark Henson. Alina shook her head. "The officer," she said, "the night Caleb died. He stood in the doorway. He told Mark to take a walk. He told me to calm down." That officer's name was in the old report. He'd responded to a domestic disturbance earlier that evening. Loud arguing, no visible injuries. No arrest. He'd separated the adults, told Mark to leave for the night, and documented the situation as verbal only. Caleb drowned 3 hours later. That officer was now a supervisor in a neighboring precinct. Carver didn't need motive. She didn't need intent. She needed acknowledgement. She submitted the full case file upward with one recommendation: administrative closure with findings, not charges, not discipline. Findings, someone objected. Someone always does, but the documentation was airtight. Audio, notes, timelines, cross-referenced failures, enough to force an outcome even if it wasn't dramatic. The transfer was paused. And for the first time since Mercer stepped into that hallway, the case moved toward resolution, not because justice demanded it, but because denial was no longer defensible. The review concluded without a press release. That was intentional. The city classified the Ward case as a closed administrative finding with systemic failures identified. No criminal charges were filed. None could be, not this late, not with evidence degraded by time and inaction. But the outcome wasn't nothing. It rarely is. The original drowning ruling was amended, not overturned, but annotated. The medical examiner added a supplemental finding noting previously undocumented indicators of neglect and domestic instability. It changed nothing legally and everything historically. Caleb Ward's death was no longer a footnote accident. It was a documented failure of layered response. CPS issued an internal corrective memo. No names, no firings. Mandatory retraining. New escalation rules for repeat domestic calls involving young children. Quiet changes that would never trend, but would matter later. The officer who responded the night Caleb died wasn't disciplined. The statute of limitations and policy constraints protected him, but he was removed from supervisory duties and reassigned. Officially, it was a career realignment. Unofficially, everyone knew why. Officer Daniel Mercer received a commendation for procedural restraint during a volatile mental health encounter. He didn't attend the ceremony. He transferred precincts 2 months later. Sergeant Lena Carver retired 6 weeks after the findings were finalized. As for Alina Ward, the outcome was the only one that made sense. The resisting charge was dropped. She was formally diagnosed with complex traumatic grief disorder with dissociative psychosis. The court ordered long-term inpatient treatment, not incarceration, structured care, supervision, therapy that addressed loss, not delusion. During her final recorded interview, she no longer called herself a skinwalker. "I said that because it was easier than explaining," she told the evaluator. "People listen when you sound dangerous." The house on Cedar Lane was sold by the county. Renovated, the wall repaired, the nightlight removed. New owners, new paint, no plaque, no marker, nothing on the outside suggests what happened there. That's how most real cases end, not with justice but with documentation. Not with villains, but with decisions that made sense in the moment and failed in sequence. The system didn't break that night. It simply kept doing what it always does until someone finally wrote it all down in one place. And that made the difference. If you stayed through the entire case, make sure you're subscribed and leave a like. Stories like this only exist if people watch them to the end. Now the real question. If you were the officer on that first call, what would you have done differently?